For joining us tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and be with you tonight in front of you here in the room and, of course, everyone that's home. A really interesting topic, and in some ways, a topic that continues to evolve. I was thinking about the title when I was coming over here, thinking, life after lockdown. I'm not sure about the word after quite. I'm not sure that we're quite beyond lockdown. So, but we'll get into that a little bit. It won't let me switch slides. One moment, please. It won't go to the next slide. Yeah, you're right. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Oh, thank God for our technical people. Just a word about West Bergen Mental Healthcare, where I work, and I'm proud to be the CEO of. We're long established in the village of Ridgewood here. Actually, have been around since 1963. We're over on Chestnut Street with a couple of buildings. We also have a Center for Children and Youth in Ramsey. About 65 to 70% of what we do at West Bergen are with children and youth. So we have all kinds of specialty programs: depression, anxiety, ADHD, autism, you name it, we do it. We proudly have a bunch of therapists in schools around the Bergen County area and a couple outside the county. And we're large. This number is not as accurate as it should be. We're more than 275 strong at this point. And I encourage you to reach out if you need anything ever. Also reach out to our website. Westbergen.org is an active website that changes constantly. And we're very regularly putting information up there. So let's just get into this for a bit if we can. This is a traumatic event, COVID, and we would consider it, at least psychologically, a traumatic event. What makes this one a little bit different than some of the other ones is that it impacts on everybody, all of us, not only in our own community, our own state, our own country, but around the world. Before you all logged on and before you joined us, we were talking about how 9/11 was just upon us, and it was 20 years. And that certainly had a universal and large impact as well. But it was really regional. Those of us that were in the tri-state area that were here really felt it. We felt it. We see renderings of people that didn't make it home. We experienced it in a different way. Those folks that are on the middle, West Coast, middle of the country, not quite as much. COVID, universal, really large, significant event that's had huge impact on ourselves, big impact on our families, all of our friends, and certainly on our communities as well when we think about our macro approach to the event. So there again, big, it really is huge. And in some ways, it being impacting on everybody makes it a kind of a big deal, right? It makes it emotionally kind of a large event. But in some ways, it's the great equalizer. It means that we're all on some level experiencing the same thing. So that helps us actually connect with each other and help each other. So I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath, everyone at home and everyone in the room, and think about, what did you learn in the past 19 months? So we can go to these talks and I can give lots of advice. I'm full of ideas about how to cope about various things. But I know that at the end of 19 months, you all, everyone at home, learned a lot about how to manage ourselves and our world in 19 months. So just ask yourself a couple of these questions. What coping worked for you in the past 19 months? What worked for you? It might be a little bit different than for me or for her or for her. What coping worked for your family? Think about your kids, your grandkids, your nieces, your nephews, your siblings, maybe your parents. And how did our communities cope? Big difference there. How did the community cope? What went on? What did the communities do to pivot? But most importantly, in your house, what did you do? I absolutely promise you that if you spent a little bit of time with a pen and a piece of paper and sat at your kitchen table, maybe by yourselves, maybe with your significant other, maybe with your kids, that you could make a pretty significant list of things that you've learned about yourself, about the world, about coping over the last 19 months. I know you have a list, and I know it's long, and I know it's complex. What we want to do is be regularly reminding ourselves of what that list is. Know that when it was 15 months ago, and we were really at the height of the difficulties. I know that it was really stressful and people really struggled. I also know that you all stepped up and you figured some things out among yourselves and among your family. And that we want to take. We want to take what we learned and keep moving forward. Because the good news is, this is a fact, human beings are incredibly resilient, incredibly resilient. And my first bullet point, a little bit controversial, I'm going to say, most will be relatively okay. Most of us are really going to get through this. Most of us are, yes, we're going to be challenged and we're going to go through periods of depression, maybe anxiety, some struggles, but most of us are really going to make it through. There's a concept in our world called homeostasis. Homeostasis is that concept where you have folks that are in crisis, and you all have been in crisis in your lives. Think about that. There's a natural inclination of a human being to not be in crisis. We don't respond well to that much adrenaline in our brains, and we don't respond that well to moving that quickly. I think of it as a highway, and as human beings, we don't want to be in the left lane all the time. It just doesn't work. And so we have this naturalness as a human being to go back to maybe not the right lane, but maybe the middle lane. And so that is just a process that Mother Nature filled us with, and it really works. Know as well that our kids, if you think we're resilient, our kids are 10 times more resilient than we are. They're flexible, they're open-minded, they're vocal, they're going to let you know when they're not happy, but they are resilient, our kids. And so know that they're really doing okay, and that as things tweak and things pivot and we go left and right and left, know that our kids are really quite resilient and quite doing okay. Just a little bit of, I'm going to use the word caution for our parents out there and our families. Know that just with like any other crisis, our kids are watching everything we do. They're watching everything we respond to. They're watching how we manage this crisis. They're watching what we say, how we treat each other, how we function. And so I always say to parents, it's not very popular, but I'm going to say it. What we say to our kids is almost irrelevant. It's really about how you live your life. Your kids watch you, even if they don't say a word, even if the teenager grunts at you at the kitchen table and doesn't talk to you on the ride to school, know that they're watching every bit of what you do. So what a great opportunity for us to model. What a great opportunity for us to kind of go back and forth and think about how we can be open-minded and really resilient with our kids. So just a little bit of cautionary tale there. I would ask you to do a little bit of Googling if you're home and if you're here. There is a concept, an absolute academically researched psychological concept called post-traumatic growth. Obviously, there's lots of research on post-traumatic stress disorder, lots of research on PTSD. And post-traumatic stress disorder, a really important area of research for our field. Think about, admittedly, I'm a history buff as well as a mental health professional. So think about post-traumatic stress disorder, what we call PTSD today. Historically, we called it, in World War II, shell shock, right? Uncle Johnny came home and he was shell shocked. He was never the same, quote unquote. As we kind of moved through the 50s into the 60s into the Vietnam era, there were other words that were used for post-traumatic stress disorder. There was a definite recognition, especially during the Vietnam era, that those men and women, by the way, that came home really struggled. And they struggled with mental health, and they struggled with substance abuse, and they struggled with fitting in. That, in my mind, was really all part of PTSD. So post-traumatic stress disorder is really well researched, really well documented, really well researched. We know how to do this. We know how to treat it. The exciting part for me is that there is a significant and growing area of research called post-traumatic growth. It came out of the 1990s. It was recognized by two psychologists in the South at a university. And they started to identify positive psychological changes after traumatic events. So think about things that you've been through in your life. I know that you have strengths that you didn't have before it. So that's an example of post-traumatic growth. And the rates are pretty significant. One study that I saw came out of the University of North Carolina, suggested that between 60 and 75% of people that go through a traumatic event will experience some type of post-traumatic growth. So there will be something that you learned, some way that you push yourself forward, something that improves because of the traumatic and difficult situation. Now, let me be really clear. Post-traumatic growth does not in any way, shape, or form deny the difficulties that folks that are going through a traumatic event have. There are difficulties, and many. But it's this concept of having post-traumatic growth, while at the same time having post-traumatic stress disorder, where there is significant disorder and significant pathology and things that we struggle with. So it is, and I thought this was a great quote, came out of research directly, unintentionally yielding positive growth. So obviously unintentional, we didn't all want to go through COVID. No one was interested in this. No one was wanting to do this. But absolutely we have grown, and absolutely we have gone forward. I'm looking forward to the research playing out. Post-traumatic growth research spiked a bit after 9/11, where there was a significant amount of high numbers of people in a condensed area. I'll be interested to watch how the research goes on this. I think that it's going to be an ever-growing field, and one that we need to think about actually even more. So bring to mind for me, if you can, take a breath, both here in the room and at home. And if you could bring to mind, what have you managed in your life that has been really difficult? So bring to mind those things that have been in your world. Death of a parent, death of a sibling, child that's not quite going down the path that we had hoped, neighbors that are difficult, our own experience being laid off, unemployment, difficulty finding a job. What did you do in your life? Because I know that you've been through a lot. Again, I think if I put you at the kitchen table, gave you a pen, gave you a piece of paper, you would rattle off the 3 or 4 very significantly difficult times in your life. Divorce, widowed, all those kind of major milestones. How did you handle them? We want to think about, how did you handle those events? What did you do during that time to get through it? What did you and your family learn? If you went through a difficult divorce, know that not only did it impact on you and your ex-spouse, but it certainly impacted on children if you have them. It even impacted on extended relatives. What about that relationship you had with your mother-in-law, who you no longer are connected to, at least legally? How did you handle that, and how did they handle that? Know that I know that you have a list, and I know that you have done it well. So think about, do you know anyone that has handled it well? I love when I overhear conversations. I'm a great eavesdropper. And so I love when I'm in a supermarket or somewhere where I'm online and I hear people talking to each other and sharing information and sharing things. And I'll hear the quote, "She handled it really well." Oh, did you hear that Gina's husband passed away over the summer? She's handling it really well. I heard that quote actually tonight when I got here from one of our folks from Valley about the situation in life. They are handling it really well. What did we learn from that person? If you have a friend that has been through a really difficult experience and a really difficult time in their life, what did they do, and what can we learn from their behavior, from their plan, from their life, that we can, let's say, borrow, I won't say steal, that we can grab and run with in our own life? Really helpful to understand those events. We need to then reflect, though, on what we can do to help ourselves. So as we are into COVID, and it isn't behind us by any stretch of the imagination, it seems to be waxing and waning. I'm sitting here in a room, just for those folks that are at home, I'm in a room full of people with masks on. I've done a presentation in this room several times over the years. I've never been in a room full of folks with masks. Different. The world is different. And here we are 19 months in, and the world is different. So we need to kind of reflect on and think a little bit about what we can do to help ourselves through this situation. So remember this phrase if you don't remember anything else from tonight. Structure, schedule, and predictability. So what scared us and what can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder around COVID is that lack of predictability, especially in this kind of situation where the virus came out. I'm not sure about you guys in the room. I had not heard the word COVID prior to 19 months ago. And I'm kind of a news hound. I like to read the news. I consider myself kind of up to date on things. I had never heard that word. Never mind COVID-19. I didn't know what 19 meant. It's a brand new concept and is a brand new concept. So it scared me, it scared us. And so that fear creates anxiety. It can create depression. It can create stress. And so when the world gets unstructured and unpredictable and scary, anything that we can do to structure it, to schedule it, or make it predictable, not only helps our emotions, I'm here to tell you it helps our brains as well. Because post-traumatic stress disorder are those things that cause stress. They release certain chemicals in our brains that we want to avoid if we can. And so schedule and structure really helps us because it feels predictable. So what I've been suggesting since COVID began for folks, whether you are at home and retired, or whether you're working, or whether you have a family, is that you have at least some kind of schedule as you go through your week. And so even on a weekend, so let's pick a Saturday, for example. I personally would like to see a couple of bullet points for the morning, what you're hoping to get done, what you were hoping to accomplish, and what you want to do that day. A couple of things in the afternoon, and maybe one or two things in the evening. Something that creates structure and predictability. It's in that predictability that we feel safe. It's in that feelings of safety that guard against those difficulties that we can have when we trauma. So schedule, structure, predictability, not just for our kids. I know that the parents in the room are all going to recognize that as teenagers become teenagers and summer vacation hits us and we try to schedule them and we do that for a reason. Parents do it intuitively because they know that kids do better with structure and schedule. I'm suggesting that we take that rule and we take that lesson and we apply it to ourselves because it really will help. Not only will it help your emotional life, it will help your brain quite truly. We want to continue to build our social connections. So here we are tonight. We have some folks in the room that are here listening. Great that you've come out to socially connect and listen to our talk. I think it's awesome that there's people online right now because they, in this moment, are socially connecting as well. They're learning. They're coming into a sense of community with the Valley Health System and West Bergen Mental Health Care. We are together tonight. And in that sense, it really does help to build social connections. We always want to have things to look forward to as well. Again, some of these things may look a little obvious, but unless we actually articulate them, write them down, talk about them, call them out, we sometimes miss them and we're not as intentional as we want and can be. So we're going to want to have things to look forward to. We're going to want to have that future oriented. Again, going up to our schedule and our structure. What's the plan for the holidays? What's the plan for Thanksgiving? What's the plan for Hanukkah? What's the plan for that school break when the kids are off from December 22nd interminably until January 3rd? What is the plan for that with our kids and with our families? Schedules, structure will really help. And in this one, we would recommend fairly strongly, actually, particularly those of you that have kids at home, that as we know that we're coming up on a break, that's called the holiday break, just as an example. I'd be encouraging folks, again, to go back to that kitchen table and sit down with your kids and talk about how do we want to handle the break? What do we want to do this year? Do we want to go away? A little bit hard with COVID, understood. If that doesn't work, what can we do locally? What can we do in the community? What is the schedule? Starting to see a theme here. Schedule, what is that going to look like? And we're wanting everyone in the family to have input in that. So anybody that's in the house that's part of your world, I'd be asking them to be part of this conversation. We call it the family plan. We need a family plan for the break. Again, it's that things to look forward to. It's that future orientation, but it goes back to that structure and predictability. It helps us feel calm. And kids, of course, with input, will have buy-in. They'll be part of that conversation. So suggestion there for anyone with kids. By the way, suggestion for those without kids as well. If you have a vacation coming up and you're not heading off to Hawaii, think about sitting down and making a schedule for your week or your long weekend or whatever that looks like for you. Schedules really are going to help. They're going to help more emotionally than you even think of. As we're going through and thinking through these things, we're balancing sharing our feelings and then taking a break from it. So talking about our feelings, talking about what we think and feel, not just think, really does help. There's something really incredibly powerful about coming together, particularly in a sense of community, but But with a friend, think about who you have in your life, whether it would be your sibling or your mom or your dad or your adult child. Who can you talk to and express how you're feeling about things with COVID? The more we can talk, the more we can verbalize. I always think about the verbalization stage as it takes a little bit of the wind out of the emotional sails. So as you're talking about stress and anxiety and fear, which is a big concept that we're seeing a lot of with COVID, the more we can talk about it and put a name to it, the more it will sort of take the power out of it. So obviously this is easier for some folks than others. Some of us are just more verbal than others. At the risk of insulting my own gender, guys are not as strong at this as they could be. Gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that you have a little bit of a leeway here. It's hard for guys to articulate, I feel scared when, ... right? It sort of fights all the sociological perspectives of being a man and being male in our culture. But truly, truly, even guys, if you can be out there and please articulate how you're feeling, it will really take the wind out of your sails emotionally. Know that it will help. It truly, truly will help. Personal concern of mine, as one kind of really sad and difficult statistic, is the fastest growing category of folks that are dying by suicide are men ages 40 to 59. So that's telling us that there's a group out there that's really struggling. And my guess here, my hypothesis as a therapist is that these are guys that are having a hard time talking about how they're feeling. So spouses and partners out there, I know that sometimes it's a little bit of dental work where you have to pull the feelings out of the mouth. I get that. But I'm asking you to really encouraging you to help the guys out there because it may not just come as easily for them. So really important for them. Similarly, we talked about before how our kids are watching us. Know that modeling how I'm feeling, modeling what I'm thinking, modeling about what is going through my mind in front of my 8, 10, 12, 22-year-old really models for them. And it really shows them that it's okay to talk about how you're feeling, that it's okay to talk about what you think and what you're struggling with. In fact, it's role modeling and kids absorb and you will see it a month later or 2 months later or 3 months later. Promise you, if you put it out there, without question, that is definitely true. So let's spend a couple of minutes, if we can, talking about how we spot folks, including ourselves, that might need more support, that might need more help. We talked about how a lot of folks are doing well. We talked about how there's this concept of post-traumatic growth, but there are going to be times and there are going to be folks that are not doing so well. And so we want to keep an eye out, for ourselves so that we kind of self-assess and are in touch with how we're doing. But I'm wanting you and your families also to look at each other. How do you think your sibling is doing? How do you think your partner is doing? How do you think your adult child is doing? Now, the parents out there can usually tell. I have a couple parents in my life that one recently that I was talking to over the weekend, and she talked about her adult son calling. He lives in Chicago. Adult son on his own working. He said that as the mom, she can tell how he's doing in the first 5 seconds of the conversation. So how he says, hi, mom, or hi, mom, or hi, mom. She said, I can tell you. And she said, I said, so how accurate are you? You get into the conversation and she said, I think I'm about 98% accurate. So you are good diagnosticians out there. You know how folks around you are doing. You really do. And so you want to be keeping an ear out for a couple things that are just things that are concerning to me and that you might want to keep an eye on. So changes in sleeping and eating patterns. So here we're looking for hypo and hyper. We're looking for folks that are not sleeping at all or sleeping 8, 9, not 8, 10, 11, 12 hours a day. Too much, really out of the norm. Same thing with eating. She's not eating at all. I'm worried about her. He's eating too much. I'm worried about him. So that things that are kind of beyond what is the usual. Changes in social relationships, significant sadness, feeling down, crying, obvious indicators, but obvious to some of us, but not to others. So if you have a family member or yourself that you're really struggling with significant sadness or feeling down, or in terms of social relationships, we're looking to see whether you're actually out there doing what you typically do. Example, you all are here in this room tonight. So I'm a little less worried about you guys, but if you come to one of these talks once a month or once every 2 weeks, and all of a sudden you abruptly stop coming. No, I don't really feel like it. No, I'm just not into it. I don't really want to go. So changes in our usual pattern. We want to be careful about that. That's always an indicator for us. And then just that absolute intuitive, stomachy, she just isn't the same. I cannot tell you what's going on. I can't tell you why, but I know that she just isn't the same. We all have people in our life that we can point this out to. So ask yourself as well, how do you think you're doing overall? How do you think you're doing? And kind of scale yourself a little bit. Are you 10 is perfect, 1 is not doing so great? So are you a 7? Are you an 8? I see a couple of kids in practice, teenagers in particular, one that I can think of. And for her, I have her scoring numerically every day how the day went. So by the end of the day, an average score, was it a 6-day, a 7-day, an 8-day? And then we're looking at patterns, right? At the end of the 3 weeks, we're looking at, are we scoring 7, 8, 9 on average, or are we all over the place? Sometimes we need an assessment tool, something that's concrete to let us kind of look at patterns. And that's just a small suggestion. Think about how you think you're doing. Whenever I do an assessment, particularly with a young person or half of a couple, I'll do the assessment, turn to the other half of the couple and say, how is he doing? How is he really doing? Because inevitably, mom or dad or the significant other really has a sense of how that person's doing. So, but sometimes we're not so self-aware, especially when we're not feeling well. It's actually really quite understandable to not understand that. So as we kind of assess and think, okay, something's up, we have something going on, we might want to think about some professional help. So when is professional help needed? This may be the most common question that I get when I'm out in the community. And it's a tough call. It's that, and I can throw a lot of stats at you. 1 in 4 people in this room and on this Zoom at some point in their life will have a diagnosable mental illness. 1 in 4. That's a significant number. Sadly, only 1 in 4 of that number are going to get help. But if we look at this 1 in 4 number, you're going to be around folks and having to make that decision on when to get professional help. We're going to talk about how, but let's first talk about when to get professional help. Tough call. Here's a stat that absolutely upsets me as the CEO of West Bergen Mental Healthcare. The average amount of time it takes for someone to get help from the time they have a diagnosable mental illness to the time they are in treatment is 8 years. Years with an S, not 8 months, not 8 weeks, 8 years. Terrible, terrible. From a public health macro, terrible statistic, one that's really concerning to me. It's why places like West Bergen and Valley and others are out here in the community talking and talking and talking, because the more we can talk about it, I want that number to be 7 years, 6 years, 5 years, 4 years. It's a personal mission without question. So we're wanting you to trust your own instinct and life experience. So as you are around your adult son, for example, and you think he's not doing so well, remember that quote from before, when should you kind of talk to him about maybe getting some help? But here's a couple things to think about. First of all, small fires are much easier to put out than big fires. So please come in to see a therapist when we only need a little fire extinguisher and we can leave the fire department at home. We want to just be able to come in and talk that through. Small fires are, as in anything, and I'm going to use a medical model just for a moment, just like any other medical illness, small fires are much easier to put out than big fires. So come in sooner than later. Appears to be more than one can casually handle. So it appears that the issues are more than one that can usually do. And when the stress, the depression, or the anxiety becomes the driver for the decisions or planning. So not as to whether you really want to go to Aunt Millie's barbecue on Sunday, but having to work around your depression or work around your son's depression or work around anxiety. When it becomes the driver for a decision maker, then that's a time that you need to reach out. Because here is the good news, and there's always good news, but here's the good news. The good news is treatment really works. The studies show us that folks that come in for therapy for not a long period of time, this is not lifelong therapy. I'm not a lifelong therapy coach. You're not going to hear that from me. I think you need therapy to learn some skills, to feel better, to enlighten yourself, and to learn how to deal with the turbulence that's 18 months away. Come back if you need to, but I'm not always necessarily. Of course, there are folks that need therapy ongoing, and that's certainly understandable. And I'm glad that the community is there for them. But for the most part, folks need education. They need some therapy to learn about themselves, and then they need to keep going. When it becomes the driver, reach out. Absolutely, positively reach out for help. So how do we find a therapist? Always a big question too. How do we find one? It's a funny field in that, and understandably so, until you really need it, you don't need it. I was talking about West Bergen being on Chestnut Street since 1963. I talk to the Ridgewooders about this all the time, and inevitably, 1 out of 2 folks that live in Ridgewood say, yeah, on Chestnut Street, a mental health center, really? No idea. Why not? Because they didn't need us. They absolutely didn't need us. Now, there's some historical reasons for that. West Bergen Mental Health Care, kind of hidden behind the scenes over there on Chestnut Street. I have to tell you that historically, 30 years ago, when West Bergen bought that building, that was a gigantic selling point because you would not be seen by your friends, right? You would not be seen by your neighbors going into West Bergen because it was a secret. Shh, don't tell anyone. So obviously, we've come a long way since then, but know that's a big issue. If you're going to look for a therapist, you're not going to call an agency like a West Bergen or any of the other many, many wonderful agencies that are out there. I usually suggest that folks take a deep breath and think about, do you know anyone else that has been in therapy or counseling? Let me say it differently. You absolutely do know folks that have been in therapy or counseling. Now, whether you're aware of that is another question. But if you are aware of that, if you know that your neighbor, your best friend, your sister-in-law was out there and did see someone for a while, pick up the phone and give them a buzz, because good referrals are good referrals. A good clinician with your neighbor is likely to be a good clinician with you. And so calling up and just, asking a friend or a colleague, someone that you trust. Always suggest asking your physician. If you have a primary care physician, they can be a big help as well. And then in your own clergy and religious community, who do you trust? Who do you speak to? Is it a minister? Is it your rabbi? Who do you talk to? And who? They all have a great network. They have a wonderful, I'm going to use an old word here, they have a wonderful Rolodex. They truly do. And clergy will also often make the connection. So we at West Bergen will talk to clergy very, very regularly, where the clergy will call up and say, I have a parishioner, they're struggling with A, B, and C. Are you the right place for that? And sometimes we are, and sometimes we're not. But if we're not, we'll certainly find a place for that. Who else do you trust? Who really do want to go out there and ask? Certainly, you can call me anytime. My cards are at the front of the room. I'm always happy to help. And by the way, you need to know that if you call me, I am absolutely positively not necessarily going to bring you into West Bergen. We're going to get what's best for you, because we're not always the right place. You may have something that's better treated by a clinician that I know that's really good at that's in Midland Park or in Hohokus or somewhere else. Absolutely, positively. Little bit of word on psychiatrist versus therapist. This is a little bit of a confusion that's out there in the mental health community. Therapists are those that you go to and talk about think about it this way, the why. Why am I upset? Why am I depressed? Why am I anxious? Psychiatrists, MDs, have really limited their practice, at least in the United States. It's evolved into symptom management. So significant depression, difficulty sleeping, crying all the time, difficulty getting through life. That is a medical illness that we can actually treat with medication, but therapy in conjunction with medication has the best outcome. At West Bergen, a place like West Bergen, you would come, you're not going to typically leave your first appointment with prescription. It doesn't work that way. We believe in therapy. We believe that medication is important, and we do that, but we believe that is an adjunct and one of the many things that we're going to work on together. So when we're looking and you're out there and you're looking for a therapist for yourself or for your nephew or for your adult son or daughter, I would start with a therapist. I would start with a licensed clinical social worker or a licensed professional counselor or a psychologist, not an MD. Apologies to any of the MDs out there. It's not where I would start. I would start with a therapist. A good therapist is going to meet with you several times. You'll start to develop a relationship. You'll develop a treatment plan. And then if he or she thinks that you should entertain or be at least evaluated for medication, they often have a relationship and they'll refer to someone. So we want you to start with the therapist as well. That's just better practice as it goes. Again, the studies show us that a fairly small number of folks are on medication. In the United States, however, which is a really interesting stat, the majority of antidepressants, particularly the SSRIs, Prozac, Paxil, some of the common antidepressants, the most prescriptions are written by general practitioners, not by psychiatrists. And some of that is because there's kind of a lack of psychiatrists in the United States, particularly in the center of the country. But some of that is because we just feel more comfortable talking to our GP that we've known for 10 years. And so he or she may start you on a low dose of a medication, and typically they're going to refer you to therapy. And so that's when you're going to be really thinking about a therapist overall. So with that, I see we do have some questions up on the chat. I am open to questions or comments or ideas. Go ahead. Anybody in the audience, or we'll. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Wow, that's a great question. Right? Are we live? Are we talking to each other on screens? That's a great question. So know that most therapists went to teletherapy immediately. We at West Bergen, for example, went to teletherapy immediately. Right now, most therapists are doing a combination of both. So they are absolutely doing teletherapy. And I like teletherapy. I'm a fan. But is it 100% the same? No. It's not. If I had to put a number on it, I'm going to say it's a solid 85, a solid 90% good. It's much better than not being in therapy. But so for some folks, being in person is helpful. You can see body language. You can get a sense of me as a clinician. I can get a sense of you, a little bit different. There are some things that you learn from people when you're on Zoom, especially when you're treating teenagers. I've had tours of bedroom colors now and new, I've met more dogs and cats than you possibly could, could shake a stick at. But so really it's a combination. It's really up to you on what you think. The advantage to teletherapy is that geography then doesn't become an issue. You can find a really good therapist in Morristown, and that's great if you're comfortable with that. So I would say both. We're operating under a waiver, a little bit of advocacy here. There is a bill on the governor's desk at this very moment. We're waiting, I hope, for him to sign that will, in a more permanent way, make teletherapy and telemedicine a way of the future. I would find it really hard to stop. I think this would be really hard to put the horse back in the gate. I would find that really challenging as an organization. I think that as a society, it would be hard for us to go back as well, not just with mental health, by the way. So both. Even groups we're doing on Zoom. You got 4, 5, 6 people on the screen. It's a group. And so the other area that teletherapy has been really helpful is there are some folks that are willing to come in for therapy on teletherapy that are not willing to come to a clinician's office. They certainly struggle with driving to a West Bergen Mental Health Care and checking in at the desk and waiting in the waiting room and then walking down the hall. And I can tell you who that demographic is. We're kind of data folks at West Bergen. There is a significant uptick in men that are coming in for therapy. And our theory, our hypothesis, I'd be interested in your opinion, is that the guys are more comfortable just logging onto Zoom, sitting in their front seat of their car during their job or at their, in their living room or their family room. That number suddenly spiked. That was an absolute surprise to us. I have to be honest with you. We as team members in the leadership went, wow, what's that about? And I really do think that for some people, it breaks down stigma. It's just more comfortable. For other people that have difficulty driving or difficulty getting out or kinds of logistical issues, teletherapy can be really a wonderful thing. So good question, though. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Some people just feel safer without question. You're right. First responders are really, and they're still struggling. One of the first things we did at West Bergen is we launched a warm line /hotline for first responders. And so we still have that going. And so for folks that are first responders, either in the medical world or the law enforcement world or the EMPs, they're able to call West Bergen, talk to a therapist up to 3 times without a transaction, without any money, without anything that, without even registering. That's a very busy process for us and remains to be a busy process. We then extended it and opened it up to educators. So that meant teachers, and not just teachers. That meant the guidance counselors, and that meant the janitor, and that meant the principal and the superintendents. So we have warm lines. And when I say warm line, what that means, no one seems to know what that means, but why we call it a warm line is because I cannot promise you that when you call West Bergen Mental Health Care at 10 o'clock in the morning, you're going to talk to someone live in that moment. So what we do agree, though, is that we will take your information down. You will get a call back from a licensed clinician within 2 hours of your call. So that's why the warm line is supposed to be a hotline. But educators, first responders, basically anyone that needs it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, good question. So the question about resistance and a question about encouraging someone that might be hesitant, resistant, not really wanting to come into treatment. Really good question. Very common problem that family members have. I would suggest to you, if you're here at this talk, that you blame it on me. So I would suggest to you that you go to your breakfast table tomorrow with your family member or friend or whatever that is, and you say, I attended this talk last night at Valley Health, and this guy was kind of going on about treatment. And I would point out 2 things to that person. One, very, very, very common what they have. So if it sounds like in this case, maybe at least we're extrapolating that maybe someone's struggling with anxiety. So by the way, the number 1 diagnosed disorder, anxiety. So that would be the first thing I would share with them, because they're going to feel like they're the only ones in the world. I'm the only one that can handle this. I'm the only one that is crazy. I can't manage this. And so I'm afraid to go in for treatment. Point 1 is that. Point 2 is our point earlier, which is treatment really, really works. So encouraging that person to seek treatment. What I typically do in that situation is I encourage the person to at least meet with the clinician. I make a deal with them. Please go twice, not once, because it's not quite enough. Go twice, and then let's talk. And usually I can get someone to go at least twice, particularly now with teletherapy. It's pretty hard to say I'm too busy or I'm too, my schedule doesn't allow it. So in those 2 sessions, it's really on the clinician, to be honest, to not only do the assessment, but the most important job of the clinician in those 2 sessions is to engage, is to grab that person and somehow make a connection so that we get to session 3. So again, you're not alone. Here are the stats, and treatment really works. So it's those 2 points. Mm-hmm. Yes. Sure. Yeah, 8 years. Why does it take so long for folks to come in for treatment? I think there's a number of things. I think stigma is huge. I'm really proud of Bergen County that all municipalities have a stigma-free committee. I don't know if you've seen these sort of Kelly Green signs in each town. And so every community has that sense of trying to work on stigma. So stigma is the broadly, in some ways, the easiest answer of why people won't come in for treatment and why they wait. Some of it, in all honesty, I understand, because some of it is, it could get better. And mental illness, emotional challenges, however you want to word it, isn't exactly linear. So you may have a son that's struggling with depression. Maybe he's a teenager, and he has difficulty on the weekends, isn't very social, but for some reason he goes to school every day. And he even has a couple of friends that he sees during the week. So it's not like a fever where you have a fever at 102 straight across. There's this ebb and flow. And I think as human beings, we're hopeful, particularly as family members, where we see a little bit of ebb, we think, oh, he's getting better, really okay. And so that can be difficult on folks. So they don't reach out and pull. I think also, and I'm going to self-critique our field, I think we're a very difficult field to understand. I think we're a really hard concept to understand. What is therapy exactly? What does that mean? Especially when your 16-year-old is rolling his eyes at you and you say, I think you should go to counseling. And he looks at you and says, I don't even know what that is. But like, you want me to go in and talk to a perfect stranger about what's going on in my life? Sure, mom. Sure. Good idea. Got it. So I do think that there's kind of a miscommunication on our part. I think we make it hard to get in. I think that we as a field make it challenging. I think there's lots of hoops and steps that we make. And I'm speaking as the leader of a mental health center, and I'm talking very macro. I think that we make it difficult for folks. It's upsetting to me. We try to make it as easy as possible, but even that has process and steps and administration, and the state wants this form, and can be really challenging. The other thing I think that makes it challenging is right now, at least post-COVID, there's simply more demand than there are mental health clinicians. That's just a fact. Up until COVID, the mental health system was just keeping up with the mental health demand. Not quite, but almost keeping up with the mental health demand. When COVID hit, the demand far exceeds the ability of the system. So the system is not designed. And when I say system, I mean the community mental health system, i.e. agencies, I mean hospitals, I mean the private practitioner that's on South Maple. I mean the whole system all put together. Mathematically, it's just not enough. Makes it hard, and it's hard. Speaking as a manager and as a leader, do the math with me. If you have therapy that lasts 50 minutes, by the way, it lasts 50 minutes because that's what we've always done. I'd love to see that researched. I'd love to see that poked out a bit. But let's just go with the current theory, which is 50 minutes. A clinician can work 35 to 40 hours a week. So at best, if you don't give that clinician any breathing room to breathe or have a sandwich or think or process, we're talking 30 people that can be seen on a caseload in a week. The math doesn't work. It's algebra in some ways. So I think that we need to rethink personally, I think we need to rethink the whole way we do things. But that's just me, one little guy. So, yeah.